I think I'll just let you give yourself an introduction and thank both you and Shane for putting for this together. So we'll rock and roll and take it away from there.
Right, Heather. Good afternoon, everybody. It's nearly evening here in Ireland. It's coming up to 4:30 in the afternoon. So again, I apologise for the mix-up, but I got here as quick as I could. I would have joined at the time if I was close to the desk. But anyhow, we're back on track. So first of all, I would like to sincerely thank you for the invitation, and also to thank Shane, who's here, for the invitation to share some of our knowledge from our own EIP Farm Succession Programme in Ireland. And I'm going to bring you down through actually the project that was ran through my own office. I was the lead partner, and this was entirely funded, as you'll see there on the front page, through European and Irish Department of Agriculture Exchequer funding. And again, the whole project was funded by the department, and part of that you had to apply to the Department of Agriculture, and through a selection process then they selected certain EIPs that they felt met their current objectives. But before we get on to the actual project, I think it's important that you understand a little bit about my background and also a little bit about agriculture in Ireland at a pretty high level. So I'm actually raised on a farm in North County Roscommon, which is on the western side of Ireland. And there's 4 provinces in Ireland, as some of you have been here probably know. So we're in Connacht, where there are 5 counties, and Roscommon is towards the Midlands, it's the West Midlands, predominantly beef and sheep in this part of the country, but almost in every local area there are also some isolated dairy farms. I went to University College in Dublin. I did a degree in agricultural science back in the mid-90s, and I've often tried to upgrade my own skills in terms of CPD myself as an agricultural advisor in Ireland. I went back and did a master's in business in 2017, which was an exceptional help to me as an individual and also to my business and where it fitted in the advisory service. And I set up my own business as far back as 2002, and now we employ 7 people between full-time and part-time. So our firm, like a lot of the advisory services in Ireland, provides support to Irish farmers in regulation and EU national farm schemes. And in our own office, we provide services for farm year design of new buildings by farmers, and our government supply grant aids for those. I also do expert witness reporting, which is where there might be in a case involving farmers that might be pending going to court or something like that, and they may need an independent expert witness to give a report on it. And then I also have a passion for the farm succession service, of which we will discuss here shortly. So we provide a range of services in our own office as a private advisor to farmers in Ireland. If you operate as an agricultural advisor or an agri-consultant in Ireland, you must be registered on the Farm Advisory Service with the Department of Agriculture. And they have some mandatory training on a yearly basis that must be completed. And separately then, as Shane is aware of, I also have been involved in our own National Association for Agricultural Consultants. I was a former president in the years 2007 to 2010. And our association made a new appointment in 2019 for a general secretary. And I was appointed then, so I'm going into my 5th year as general secretary of the National Association for the ACA. And predominantly my role is head of operations, dealing with senior people in the Department of Agriculture and across all stakeholders within the Irish agricultural industry. And within the ACA network, we have about 280 advisors. I fit in as one of those, and there's 2 others in my office also. And we service in the region of around 55,000 Irish farmers in the provision of services. Just one slide really on the stats of farming in Ireland currently. We've in the region of 137,000 farmers. The average herd size, which is probably a surprise to many of you, is in the region in 2020, and it hasn't changed much. Our Central Statistics Office, that's the CSO, complete regular independent census on agriculture and indeed and many other sectors. But the average farm size in Ireland was around just under 34 hectares in 2020. And that has been a little bit of a steady decrease in the average size of farms in Ireland since the early 2000s, at the millennium. And of the above high-level figure, about 50% of farmers in Ireland are involved in some level of beef production, either through beef cows or suckler cows, we call them in Ireland, and fattening cattle, or maybe selling the wainlands or steers or heifers onto another farmer for fattening. And the average herd size of those 50% of those farmers in the top line is around 70 cattle. There are about slightly over 15,000 dairy farmers in Ireland, and about 6,000 of those are in what we call a derogation, and it's not technically a license, but it's something similar, where you apply on an annual basis to the Department of Agriculture to farm at a higher level than the other farmers in Ireland, and you must go over and above and complete other additional environmental work on your farm for those 6,000 farmers. We've about only 17,500 sheep farmers in Ireland, and the average flock size is around 155 sheep. And out of the 137,000 farmers, we've about 18,000 female farmers. And again, touching now on farm succession, there's about a third of the farmers in Ireland are over 65 years of age, and that reflects fairly similarly across all of the EU member states in Europe. And again, the proportion of farmers under the age of 35 has been falling consistently since 1991 over the last 40 years. But there was a slight increase that bucked that trend in 2020, in that period 2020 to 2020, slightly increased. The main reason for that, folks, was that the Department of Agriculture did bring in 2015 more incentives to encourage young farmers to get involved in farms, with additional top-up payments to those young farmers being involved on the home farm. And that's predominantly the reason that there was a change in that trend at that period. And the last stat, really, from an Irish agricultural point of view, before I start talking about our own project, is that it's a very beneficial position in Ireland, in that 3 out of every 4 farmers in Ireland use an agricultural advisor or consultant. And there are about 43,000 farmers that are advised by Teagasc, which are the public advisory service supported by the government. And there's 55,000 farmers in Ireland serviced by the private advisory service, where my association fits in. Notwithstanding that positive figure, it has left a challenge for the other 30,000 or so farmers outside of that don't engage with an advisor or professional on a regular basis. And that alone is a challenge for our sector, because there probably are predominantly older people and don't engage with anybody professionally on an annual basis. And with all the objectives and climate change targets, it's important that all farmers are getting those messages. Just to give you a visual sense there, you'll see that back in 1991, and down at the bottom you'll see the average age of farmers in Ireland. And in 1991, you can actually see that there was a fairly even spread of farmers across all age groups back at that stage. But as we reach now today, you can see that there's a bigger range in the steps, particularly at the dark blue one, which is the younger section of farmers under 35, and the grey one on the right hand side again, in which the average age has increased. So that's just a visual representation of the age bracket of farmers in Ireland. So just leading on to the actual EIP project. So EIP stands for European Innovation Partnerships. They're across all of Europe. So what was the rationale for me deciding to do an EIP project on farm succession? Well, I know from looking at my own farmers, which my own customer base, we have a couple of hundred farmers, customers. I knew by interacting with my customers the last 20 years that the customer base is quite high, reflects the same as what's across nationally in Ireland. I had a personal interest in the dynamics of farm succession, and I think for any of you that are invited in advisory here today, it's one thing I always say to people when they ask me, even outside the sector, the advisor has a critical role in having a close relationship with farmers, and they often over the years shared personal information with me about farm succession and the dynamics at home that they may not actually share with even other farm family members. And again, I over the years had an interest in that and listening to people, and why they were finding challenges with getting the next generation to come involved, what were the blockages and the challenges and all of that. So I had a personal interest in it. Again, it's obviously, as a business person, no different than anybody else here today that's running an advisory business. There was obviously an inherent care within me for our customers, because the success of my business in the future and continue employing younger people with me is ultimately going to be dependent on the number of farmers that are active in our sector. And again, so there was a genuine concern there about those people and what were they going to do with their family farms in the future. Again, my own dad passed away about 9 or 10 years ago, 10 years this summer. And again, so I had personal experience with my mother at home of farm succession and all of the scenarios that are put in place in a family when someone leaves this world. And again, I learned from that experience and was able to share that with my own customer base. Again, there was also a desire within me to help our customers and introduce what I thought was their challenges in trying to overcome the challenges in farm succession. So why I say that is that, I could see that they were consistent across a lot of farmers, the challenges and the blockages to try and help people to engage with the next generation and ultimately transfer the family farm onto those people. And finally, the department launched a call for EIP projects in Ireland. I think in actual fact, when we were approved, there were in the region of 30 projects applied. And our farm succession and wellbeing project was one of 8 that was successful at that time. And again, the advantage was that the department with EU funding were going to entirely support the financial project, which made it attractive for me to actually engage with the process. So how do we select our farmers? So again, I don't expect you to read all of this, but we went through all our entire client base in our own business, and we felt we needed to get a broad selection of farmers that reflected our customer base. So we tried to select people from those that were married or with partners with children, those with partners or married or not married without children, because obviously there's another challenge there where they don't have an automatic person following them. We try to also engage with single male and female farmers because it's very isolated working on their own in those situations. And they also have a major challenge that they don't have any successor for the farm. We also try to engage with those that were widowed, living on their own, and may have actual family. And then we got our client base down to around 70 or 80, and then we went through it again and tried to select a fair distribution across it. And in the end, we picked 30 farmers that reflected what we believed was a reflection of just not only our customer base, but also Irish farming currently. And we engaged with those. And the final decision probably when selected them was that we selected people that we knew would engage with the entire process over 18 months to 2 years. Because the challenge is when you introduce farmers to some of these, there will be dropout. But in fact, our group and project is very proud that the first 30 farmers that engaged stayed the course until the very end. And that was a credit to those family farms and the people engaged in the project. So we actually had 4 main objectives in our project: to identify the feelings of the farmer, of not only themselves, but their spouse and their family members, and the experience of farm succession, and how their emotions actually affected their outlook for their future and their relationships, and the consequences of that, and also the consequences of those challenges on their physical and mental well-being. So we also, a second objective was to identify the supports and experts that we believe were required from our operational group to help the farmer overcome those emotional and other challenges. Introduce the necessary supports then that the farmers required from our expert group and help them through that process. And then on an individual basis, evaluate with the farmer their mental and well-being state, both at the beginning of the project and again at the project when all of the experts were introduced. a visual there of the actual partners again. So our own business, myself was the lead partner. So the actual experts in our group were, and this is based on my experience as an advisor in over 20 years. I noticed engagement with farmers over the years that when farmers come in to me on a one-to-one basis, started discussing farm succession, that they had a very in-depth discussion with me as their advisor on a one-to-one about farm succession at home. But I might meet that farmer again the following year and they had done nothing with it. In fact, I could meet them 3 or 4 years after that again, and they still had the same issues to deal with at home and hadn't made any progress. And two of the main issues that any farmer, I think, would have globally, not just in Ireland, is what are the legal implications of transferring the farm? And secondly, what are the tax implications, not just on the person transferring it, but also on the person that the farm has been gifted to, if they're a living person, or through inheritance if that successor is deceased. So we introduced our operational group, including myself, a solicitor, Samantha Geraghty, James Fitzmaurice, who specialises in tax with also in agriculture, Dr. Michael Hayden from Maynooth, who is farming background and has been involved in many farming projects through his university. And again, he was the main researcher that met the farmers at the beginning and helped the group pull all of their important research data together. And then the Dr. Lisa Hines, who is from Cree, and that's a heart and stroke unit based in the west of Ireland that does fantastic work for engaging with all parts of society, but also have a part where they deal with farmers on their physical health and also their well-being. And finally, Lawrence Gahan in the bottom right was from the HSE, and that's the equivalent in other countries of the Department of Health. The HSE are the Health Service Executive of Ireland, ultimately responsible for health and all the services in our country. And Lawrence specialises in programs that deal with men's health, but also some farmer well-being projects. So we had 6 partners with a wealth of experience in our operational group. The main phases, I don't want to just, I think it's important for you to understand the phases we had to go through was a planning stage, then the data collection with Michael as the researcher, then we had to do initial data analysis, then we organised the consultations with the individual experts as required by the farmer, then there was a second phase of data analysis, and then obviously a pretty long period of report writing and disseminating those results at the end. Our project has now finished. Was completed at the end of last year and launched by Minister for Agriculture of State Martin Hayden in Dublin in November. These were the key KPIs. So for the legal person to discuss about the legal implications of transferring it, like had they even the basics of having a will in place. The tax person, the accountant, was where I supported them because separately to my own current profession, I do hold a license in auctioneering, which is valuation in Ireland, and that was beneficial in the project because I was able to put a value on the farms and assets of the 30 participants in our project and give that to our tax expert in advance of the meeting the farmer before they got down to really discussing the intricacies of tax and valuations of assets and all of that. So that was the tax experts really to engage with them and really to try and alleviate some of the concerns that farmers have on transferring the farm over in relation to tax. My role was obviously to talk to them about the management of the farm, running the farm as a business. And if you were to hand it over to the next generation, are they prepared to take on the farm? Are they going to run it part-time? Are they going to run it full-time? Are they going to try and make some income out of the farm? Are both people going into that arrangement trying to get finance out of the farm? So does the mother or father or person that's transferring it, do they still expect to get some level of income in the first couple of years out of the farm? And the person moving in obviously has to see that it's of some economic benefit also getting the farm. In the health and well-being part, every farmer was assessed from a physical health perspective at the very beginning of the project. The health experts also discussed their stresses and concerns about the particular issue of farm succession. Because of data protection and obviously medical professions having a one-to-one with those farmers, the group were not privy to the individual discussions obviously with those farmers, but they were able to give our group an overall holistic report on the major concerns of the farmers as a group. And then finally the overall part of at the end then was obviously to compile it as a research project and engage with the Department of Agriculture and other stakeholders that have an interest in this area. So we had 30 farmers engaged in the project. The average age of the participants in our project was 65. So we had some people up as far as 80 years of age, but very active on their farms and in good health overall. And then we had some farmers back down in their 30s and 40s. The average farm size, which slightly under the national average, was around 27 hectares or 68 acres. And the average farm asset across all of the 30 participants was €725,000. That was the average value of their farmland, their livestock, their facilities, their buildings, anything to do with the farm. So the status of the succession planning initially when the engagement was done with those farmers was that 50% of the farmers had a plan in place. However, actually, none of the farmers had a formal written plan in place. A lot of it was in their heads. Some of them had communicated, some of them hadn't communicated. So again, that was a major thing which I knew would probably come out of the project, was that a lot of farmers are playing around with this in their minds on a daily basis, and they have a plan, but they've never engaged with anybody to discuss it. And that came through in the project. 2/3 of the farmers had a will in place. Now, this is quite a concern. 11 of the farmers out of the 30 had no legal will in place, which meant if they were to die suddenly, their assets fall into their estate, and then partners, wives, spouses, husbands, children all have a legal expectation and a right to that estate in the event of no will in place. But another concern was, though, that of the farmers that had a will in place, 50% of those, it was highlighted that their will was either out of date or didn't reflect their current wishes. In fact, some of the wills were written 30 or 40 years ago, and some of the beneficiaries in those wills, their circumstances had changed. I think in one case, one of the beneficiaries was deceased, so the will hadn't been updated. And that was a critical piece of information we got out of a small sample group of farmers. And again, the sample group, remember, reflected fairly accurately across all the farmers in Ireland. And if you can extrapolate from that this is probably a fair reflection across Irish agriculture. So the concerns generally in Irish agriculture across all of the farmers, before I start talking about actually our project. So the evidence supports, and there's a lot of research on this, that general farm safety is contributed to the mental state of the farmer and the well-being of the farmer. And additionally, research shows that Ireland loses more farmers to suicide than actual farm accidents. Farming is obviously increasingly more technology involved, and it's reducing the need for traditional high levels of manual work. But that is in one way has had a negative effect on the physical activity of the farmer. And that can impede obviously on both their mental and physical health. Again, many research papers, and Shane will probably acknowledge this, that there's a wide number of reports on both the physical and mental health of farmers, that there's an increased risk compared to the general population. And our experts from CRE, or health and stroke people, when they go around to agricultural marts or markets, you may call them, across other parts of the world, they go to those places to actually invite farmers when they're at those markets. Have you 5 or 10 minutes till we do your blood pressure and have a discussion about your general health? And in many cases, there's a high percentage of farmers are failing that. Again, in recent activity, And I know the BMI, and in fact probably myself would maybe fail it. It's quite probably hard to pass, but again, 86% of farmers in Ireland, based on papers that our group looked at before we wrote our final report, that they're bordering on being overweight or obese. And again, it's a figure that is greater than the national average in the population. And again, farmers in Ireland, probably no different than anywhere else in the world, have a high risk of cardiovascular disease. And again, that's a major cause for concern within the farming community. Within our own actual project then, what were the main concerns? Practically every farmer said to us, across all of the experts when we met them, and I should have stated probably earlier and I forgot to say it, is that after a researcher met the farmers, I was next to meet them because we felt as a group it was important for me to meet them next to understand their farm, their management practices. Is there anybody available as a successor? Then do the valuation of their assets. The next expert they met on a confidential basis in a one-to-one meeting, and they could bring some of their family members or spouses or partners with them to that. The next person they met was their tax expert. Because after talking to me, if they were getting their head around maybe the son or daughter or nephew or niece, perhaps they may be interested in it. So then it was probably important, we felt then after that, to talk to the tax person, because now we're getting closer to maybe that person is suitable to be a successor. And if we were to give it to that person, what are the tax implications? And then the final expert to meet them was the solicitor to discuss if they were to transfer it. And then at the end, the health experts met them again one more time. Another concern was that came up in a lot of farmers is, and no doubt this is global across the worldwide, is deciding within a family unit who is the right successor. I'll give you a typical example, and this farmer wasn't in our group. I have an excellent dairy farmer with 3 sons and actually 2 daughters, and one son is on the herd number, is actually actively farming with the farmer at the minute. But the farmer would privately say to me that he's still not the best farmer. And he was the most suitable at the time. But again, that farmer has, and his spouse, there isn't today probably they don't have that challenge to discuss, because they have 5 children that may be interested. One that's farming, the father mightn't think that he's necessarily the best. He has a daughter that's good at farming. So all of those dynamics come into when they're talking about the farm succession and identifying the right successor. One thing that actually came up too, before I leave that, is some farmers in our groups, and this is outside of the groups too when I talk to farmers, actually intended to give the farm to all the children because they didn't want to necessarily make that hard decision. I have another customer that actually is going to leave the farm to 4 children. And I've tried to explain to the farmer that once you do that, that farm is not going to be economic again once you do that. There's serious consequences perhaps for those other 3 individuals if one of those 4 decides to go farming, to buy them out. Some of them may waive their rights. They may not want any part of the farm. But again, people were considering giving the farm over to the entire children. And again, that has its challenge in its own right. One of the major things in Ireland, and I think it reflects across the EU, is farmers constantly telling me, including all of my long-term farmers, that they actually are quite saddened that they actually have family members coming after them, but absolutely no interest in the farm. And again, that's it's a mental challenge for those people. In Ireland, we're a relatively young country. We're only 120 years old. We fought hard years ago in history to get our actual land. And our predecessors, there's a big attachment to land in Ireland, but a lot of farmers now currently at this generation now, quite disappointed privately when they talk to me and with their spouses and partners at home, that it's such a shame that the next generation do not have the same level of interest that they had when they took it over from their parents. Part of that actually is a lot of attractive other economic factors in society, and people not willing to give the time, and also it's economic. A lot of farms in Ireland are just about making a profit, others are making a loss. And last year in Ireland, just to give you an example, and latest the farm survey would indicate that dairy farms were making on average 10 times more income than an average beef farm or sheep farm in Ireland. So that again, in its sense, is a major challenge. The next generation see it as not making huge money, and in many cases, when I talk to the next generation, the sons or daughters or nephews and nieces separately to the mother and father, I'm hearing from them in some cases that they would rather that their parents wouldn't give it to them because they would feel it would be a burden, and they'd feel like that they had to make a go of it while their parents were alive. There's also uncertainty regarding the exact timing of when to give the farm over. Is it today? Is it next year? Is it in 5 years' time? And a tax expert, and James in our group, was only able to tell those farmers, if you execute the transfer today, we can tell you what the tax is today. There's going to be an election in Ireland in the next 12 months. Sometimes when they change their government, tax laws change. So a tax expert can only tell a farmer, this is the tax law today. We don't know what the tax law is going to be in 5 years' time if the future successor is willing to take it at that stage. It might be more attractive or less attractive from a tax point of view to do it at that stage. There was also, when you talk to the owners of the farm, concerns over what the other family members think. And again, I can understand where there may be 4 or 5 children at home or within the locality interested in taking over the farm, and that the parents are identifying one person over the others. Obviously, that's going to lead to potential challenges within that family unit. However, we were very keen to tell them that generally those concerns and arguments happen where the communication isn't clear from the very first day about involving everybody in that discussion. And in fact, I've reassured farmers that when you bring your 5 or 6 children or 2 around the table, you may be pleasantly surprised that actually a number of them are actually going to rule themselves out of the farm discussion and make it easier for you and whoever else is with you to pick or select a transferee. There's obviously financial concerns. So again, if you are under 35 in Ireland and have a certificate in farming at a minimum qualification, you can be exempt from what we call stamp duty. So it's a 0%. But if you're over 35, and look at the figures I shared with you earlier, a lot of the farms are being transferred to the next generation when people are in their 40s and 50s. And a lot of those tax allowances are not available to them at that stage. There's obviously legal concerns with all of the 30 farmers in our group. Every one of them had concerns about the implications of transferring the farm today when they're alive versus when it's executed when they die. And again, financial concerns came into about when they're alive, all of that. Again, retirement income. So if the parents at home are getting a fairly considerable income out of the farm and they transfer that over, and globally people are living longer, what was going to happen those people then for an income over the next 20 years? And all of these discussions were with the accountant and tax expert. Their future healthcare costs. And we have a scheme, what we call in Ireland the Fair Deal scheme, where if people go into public nursing homes or fall into ill health, our state can come after those particular assets. And that's a major concern for farmers in Ireland. Again, another concern that came up greatly in our group is that they may sign it over, but some of them are actually concerned that when they do, even when they're still alive and on this earth, that within that couple of year period, it may be transferred over, sold while they were alive. And then the legal rights in cases where they transfer the farm to a son or daughter or nephew or niece or whoever they select as a successor, and if that person is in a relationship and a potential breakdown of that relationship, what could happen to farm assets? So 2 slides just on the project overall outcomes. 55% of the participants in our group said that the project assisted them to develop a more comprehensive farm succession plan. 85% of the participants in our project stated that it alleviated a lot of stress and worry about the farm succession process. The entire project provided participating farmers with the opportunity to ask questions and gather information from a suite of professional experts. Again, involvement prompted discussions with families about the ownership, which may be postponed the last 10, 20, 30 years by the farmer, and it allowed them to talk about the future potential of the farm and successor willingness to take on the farm. There were genuine concerns by the 30 farmers about the legal rights or the potential of the spouse of the successor marrying into the farm, and this came up, and again it's probably no different than anywhere else in the world, but it did come up as a concern that the asset, once it leaves and goes to the next generation and they're in a relationship and it breaks down, that they were concerned that their farm may be sold, or there had to be some agreement at that stage. Again, the project, and one of the other outcomes came out of it, was that consideration should be given to alternative ways to providing the separating spouse. It's not there at the minute, but perhaps the person that's in charge of the farm, or currently the farmer, gets first option on it, or that there's some way of trying to arrange that next generation person gets the farm into some other way of providing security to the other person. In terms of health and well-being, so the project did highlight obviously health concerns. In fact, out of the 30 farmers that were screened, only 4 of the farmers in our group had what our health experts would refer to as being optimal health for a farmer or any actual person. In fact, one person actually was not allowed leave our office at the assessment stage until they had an urgent discussion with their GP. And in fact, the nurse that did that assessment probably prevented a fatality, because they actually said that it was a number of years since they met a person with their blood pressure so high. And again, the nurse, as part of our project, wouldn't allow that farmer leave our office at that interview until they rang their GP in their presence and made an appointment, which was made at 9 o'clock the next morning. And the nurse in our project with Cree rang back the GP and the farmer the next day at around midday to ensure that the farmer had fulfilled that appointment, which he did, and was put on medication. And again, the nurse said that he was potentially within days or weeks of a massive heart attack or a massive stroke. So again, if nothing else came out of our project, that alone was a very successful outcome. So again, the risk may consequently have an effect on the farm succession. This is on their health, to engage in a long and purposeful active retirement. So again, our project stated it was imperative that public health services put focused initiatives in place to engage with the farming community on health and well-being issues, and there are many of them there already, but again, it probably needs to increase in screening of farmers to prevent some of these issues. And again, across the community, and to try and access those diagnostic supports. Last few slides. Our project was fully funded by the Department of Agriculture through EU funding, and it's in our report and public domain. Our project initially was expected to cost in the region of €120,000. We came in under budget about 115,000. The farmers received no payment. The payment was made towards the experts' time and all the administration and every other part of the project. Excuse me. And the farmers were very satisfied that over a number of months, they got all of the expert services for free. And something, as I alluded to earlier, my concern was dealing with farmers is that they would talk to me about succession from an agricultural point of view around their farm. They would tell me and reassure me, yes, I must go now and talk to the tax expert. And as I said earlier, I might meet them a year or 2 or 5 years later and they never did it. So hence I believe that the opportunity was for this project to structure it and let us be in charge of it, organise the appointments, schedule all the meetings for the farmers to meet the experts. And it's a credit to all of the farmers in the group that not one appointment was missed over the entire project to the very end. Finally then, our project recommendations. So again, in terms of, we cannot underestimate the importance of developing the succession plan. There's a culture of secrecy within the whole topic, within farms, within families, that needs to be overcome. And farmers feel very isolated and carry a lot of that burden on their shoulders on a day-to-day basis. Again, what came out of the project, and I know this from, again, personal experience, a lot of pressure within family dynamics from spouses and partners to make the farmer make a decision, and they're not willing or not able or don't have the necessary skills or haven't engaged with the necessary experts to help them make that discussion. And I've been on many farms where I've picked up where there's considerable tension in the relationship between the partners or husbands or wives in the family dynamics. And a lot of it leads back to a farmer working longer hours, getting older, not engaging with the next generation and causing stress at home. Again, 50% of the farmers in the unit did express an openness to explore the farm partnership model, which in Ireland, there's in the region of about 3% of the 137,000 farms operate as a farm partnership model, where you can enter into 2 agreements with a younger person. Indeed, they don't have to be a younger person, but generally they are. They don't in fact have to be a family member, but in the majority of cases they are a son or a daughter, some cases a nephew or niece. It's a structured agreement with that farmer over a minimum 3 years, up to 10 years it can last. And it outlines the responsibilities of the peoples in that partnership. In Ireland, you can also update that partnership to another higher level and call it a farm succession partnership application. And there are tax incentives in Ireland that if the farmer transfers at least 80% of the asset to the younger person that's identified within that partnership before 10 years, they get tax incentives to do it. So there's been a huge promotion of farms partnership model in Ireland in the last 8 years. And we're at the stage now where there's probably in the region of 3,500 or so farmers in that model. There also needs to be awareness of advisors, both public and private advisors, of when they're discussing the management and operations of farms, that they should encourage farmers to have a holistic approach to farm succession, which they do need to engage at some stage with a solicitor and a tax expert, and that the advisor tries and encourages the farmers to do that. It is not just on an individual basis. They should meet those people and engage then afterwards with those advisors in line with the farmer's obviously request, and try and fill the gaps to help the farmer come to some clarity regarding farm succession. And again, the future of farming women in Ireland in those models. There's thousands of female and women in Ireland in the background in farms in Ireland that don't necessarily always get the recognition. But again, in fairness to our own government, there has been incentives in recent years to try and encourage more females and women into the sector, including now some additional grants for updating your farm buildings and all that in the last 12 months. And again, we cannot underestimate the risk to farmers working in isolated situations for prolonged periods, not engaging with their general practitioner, with their doctor, their nurses, and again, the negative impact that their health and well-being has on not just the farm today, but in the future. So just 3 last final reports that came out of it. We led in some of our provisional analysis to the department in the last 2 years. and we greatly welcome, which mirrored what we were doing, is an announcement came from our own department last year for this particular grant that farmers can avail of since last autumn, where it's entirely just for succession advice. And to the credit of the department, and no different than your own industries in your own countries, some of the regulations we deal with in Europe could be now 100 pages. But in credit to the department, the terms and conditions of this grant is less than 2 pages. And all it is to incentivize people to use experts to talk about nothing else, only farm succession, which models the kind of unit that we had in this project. We greatly welcomed that as a project when it was announced. And you can get up to 50% of those costs in engagement with those experts, up to a maximum of €1,500. And all the farmer needs to do is submit their actual invoices, marked paid, and they get their grant. It's as simple as that, and it's a great incentive. The uptake hasn't been huge because it opened and closed pretty fast, but it will open again later on this year, and farmers will be asked then to submit their invoices. So a very positive move. So again, our EIP recommended that we should have a pilot program in Ireland. 9 million in an overall scale of things in a big economy, not just in agriculture, where the overall budget for agriculture in Ireland alone is about 3 billion. And no different than your other countries, we recommended that a small actual incentive, a pilot program that could actually help around 10,000 farmers. And you can see that our suggestion mirrored very close to what the department recommended in the first one above, where we recommended again that they would get grant aid of 60% up to a grant of 1,500. So, you know, an overall spend relatively small, but dealing with a very, very important topic, because if we can't engage with farmers to pass on the farms, it has a huge threat for our agricultural industry, our economy, and also the wider scale across Europe. So again, we also said that there was a greater opportunity to explore both what the department are trying to do and what our EIP recommended, and indeed many other EIPs that are engaging with farmer well-being and health, and also the succession project, to meet and maybe have a focus group to come up and maybe bring our ideas and what they want in their objectives for a department together, and bring in other experts and try and have incentives to deal with this issue. So that's a very quick, I hope I haven't been too long. I ran through it pretty fast. Again, I'm open to questions, Heather and Shane. So again, it's a quick run through our project. And again, sincere thanks for the opportunity to present to you this afternoon.